Hi everyone, Christina here. Welcome to another video at my YouTube channel. Today I'm continuing with Mail Art Month, and I'm going to start out with this fun stamp set from Simon Says Stamps from their latest release. This is Print Making Hearts. There's actually a coordinating die that goes with this too, I believe, but I'm just going to be using the stamps today. So there are 3 different stamps. They're all like all of the little heart images are grouped together, so you can stamp them all at once just in 3 steps. So I'm starting out with this very first one, and I picked this particular stamp from the stamp set to start with because the 2 hearts at the top, I can get a better kind of positioning and sizing with those, because they're all the way to the very top of the grouping of hearts. And you can look at the back of the stamp set packaging for an example of what it looks like when it's all stamped together. So I started with my middle color. I've picked 3 colors, a dark, medium, and light. And I started with the middle color and stamped twice. This is the color Sweets from Simon. And I stamped that twice just to make sure I got a really solid impression with the images. And then when it came to positioning the next stamp, I actually took a piece of acetate. You could also use stamp packaging or anything like that, something that's clear. And I actually used that to stick the stamp to so I could slide it around and get it positioned just right over the top. I'm using the color Bubblegum, which is the lightest shade in my trio. And I'm stamping this twice as well. You may have seen me rub my fingertips over the stamp set before I inked it up. I did that with all of these stamps because they were brand new stamps and they were very, very solid images. And so sometimes the ink can kind of beat up on that if it's a brand new stamp set. So kind of rubbing your fingertips over the top sort of seasons the stamp and makes it take the ink a little bit better. Okay, I'm on to my third color, which is Taffy. This is the darkest shade. I love this trio of colors, especially around Valentine's Day, because it's got like the pink and to purple to magenta kind of tones. I think they just look so cute. So I'm stamping this third one. And like I did before, I did stamp it twice to make sure that I got a really solid impression. There's another stamp set in the latest release from Simon that I wanted to show you all on this card. This is the Ornate Borders and Frames stamp set. And I designed this one, and so I wanted to specifically talk about these very thin kind of frames that are included in the stamp set. Without a little bit of explanation, you might think, what is wrong with these stamps? They're so hard to use. So I wanted to show you the stamps in use and give you some tips. So the first thing you might want to do is if you have the coordinating dies, you might want to die cut first and then stamp the images, because then you can really kind of double check to make sure that those stamps fit inside that cut shape. The other thing you can do is what I'm doing today is I'm not using the dies at all. I'm just stamping directly onto my card. So I use the edges of an A2 piece of cardstock to help me kind of position that stamp in the right spot. I did a test run and then I stamped on my project. The other thing that you might want to take into account or consider when you use these frames is let them be wonky. Let them be a little bit not quite precise. I think it adds a lot of character to your card, especially with such fun heart images on this particular card. I really could have let that border be a whole lot more wonky, and it would really lend itself to the style of the card. But for this one, I wanted it pretty straight, so I just used that. If you'll notice here, as I'm removing the stamp from the door of my MISTI, I'm not pulling it off and stretching it. As I was pulling it up off the door of my MISTI, I pulled a little bit off and then moved my hands and pulled off a little bit more. And that will really help retain the shape of the stamp. So my card front is basically finished. I'm going to adhere it to the front of a card. I've decided to use a craft colored note card today, just for something a little bit different, a little pop of color when you open the card. And my card base was cut a little too large for my card front, so I did use a T-square ruler to kind of lop off that end and finish up the card. So This card is finished. I'm going to move on to the envelope. And because I used a craft colored cardstock for my note card, I decided to use that same color of envelope. And the first thing I did was I used that ruler just to add like 2 long boxes at the bottom of the envelope. I did this particular style of address on one of my very early mail art rainbow envelopes, and I just really loved that style, and I haven't really revisited it since 2019. So it's nearly 5 years later. Let's do it again. So basically, I have blocks of color at the bottom of the envelope, and then the person's name above it written very large. So I'm penciling on Robin's name. And just to change it up from that first envelope that I did years ago, I decided to do a script for her first name. I'm using a white gel pen just to kind of draw in these block letters, adding some serifs on the ends of the letters themselves, and kind of trying to keep it fairly straight and all of the lines about the same thickness. For her first name, I used kind of a pink magenta jelly roll, and I actually made her name quite thin. I did thicken it up a little bit, but I'll come back here at the end and thicken it up some more. So here's what I meant by having blocks of color at the bottom of the envelope. I decided to use black and then a couple colors of pink and purple, and then I'll come in and write the address using a white gel pen, the same one that I used for her last name. So I started to fill in all of those blocks of color with some additional gel pens, and the gel pens ran out of ink and they stopped working. So, mental note, I need to buy some new gel pens. These are the Sakura Jelly Roll Moonlight pens that are opaque so they can go on top of dark surfaces. And I've just had them for ages and ages, and it's probably time to get some new ones. So eventually I had to kind of do away with the idea of using those gel pens. And instead, I grabbed some colored gouache paint from Altenew, from their artistry line. And I just painted over those blocks that I was unable to finish coloring in. So I used a pale pink shade, and then I mixed a purple with that pale pink to lighten it just a little bit, and then painted over that purple block. And it turned out to be a little bit darker than the original purple, but I think it looks great. And it really kind of salvaged this envelope. I had already spent quite a bit of time on it, and I wanted to salvage it. The blocks of color weren't perfectly sized for each segment, but they were close enough to kind of fill in that area. The numbers on her street it just started with 21, so I knew that was very small, so I just did mostly as kind of a square shape. And I did about that same shape for the state. I added my return address on the flap of the envelope, and then I went back and thickened up her first name. I mentioned earlier that I was going to do that, and I did that right here at the end just because it started to look lost, in comparison to the thicker last name and those blocks of color. I grabbed a kind of a mid-tone gray marker and added a little bit of shadow under that block of color, and also on the underside and to the right of all of the letters that I'd already added for her first and last name. And this just adds just a little bit of shadow, really emphasizes those words. I think in the end, I probably would have skipped the shadow on that pink first name, but all in all, it worked out great. Just a special note that Robin did give me permission to use her address today, so big thanks to Robin. And here is the finished card and envelope set. I think it worked out pretty well. Having a simple card design plus a very simple envelope really worked out well. So thanks so much for joining me today. I'll be back on Monday with my usual live stream at 6 p.m. Mountain Time. So come back and join me live here at YouTube. And thanks so much for watching today's card and envelope. I'll see you guys next time.